Good afternoon. I'm going to call to order the July 13th meeting for Environmental Matters. Can I get a motion to modify the agenda to add a discussion about City Dock leasing? And I think that's it. I'll second. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Thank you. And is there a motion to approve the minutes from June 6th?
Both sets, yes, I so
Both
moved.
sets. Second. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Motion carries. All right, and now we'll start with our guests from City Manager's Office and Harbor Master's Office. So I thank you. I invited you here because we've been getting a number of leases regarding City Dock for various uses, and so I just wanted to kind of understand the process as far as what kind of, is there a code requirement regarding standards as far as what criteria you may use as far as evaluating those, or do you just give all the leases to us for review? And also just information on the pilot program, which I've heard about, what the intention is.
Good afternoon, Beth Bellis, Harbor Master for the record. So there is a code requirement if you want to do commercial activity at City Dock. You can either use our charter dock and then you don't need a lease, but at any other location, you would need a lease. And so the way that leases came about in this particular year, because we only got the dock in 2022 of March, right? So it took us several months to develop policy and sort of—
For the Burris Dock?
The Burris Dock, right. So we focused initially on making sure our tall ships and our educational and historic programs could be preserved there. And then this year, some folks from Annapolis Maritime Museum approached us and requested a lease for the Wilma Lee Skipjack. And so the way that the leases have worked this year is they requested the lease. I contacted the mayor's office to see if that was something that he would sponsor, because any leasee needs a sponsor. And then we talked about what would be in the city's best interest, and we worked back and forth for quite a time to make sure that they thought they could be successful and we could preserve the city's best interest, because there's a lot of competing needs down there. And then once that group had secured their lease, some other groups got wind and they also became interested. And so in fairness to all of the groups, we entertained those. And as you may recall, Downtown Party Boat, which is also Maritime Entertainment LLC, his lease was passed relatively quickly. I think the rules were suspended. But also Sea Spirit with Chesapeake Nautical Cruises was also interested, but he got into the game a little late, and his has not been approved, and I think that ship has sailed for him because it's too late in the summer.
Okay. No pun intended.
Yeah, I know. I didn't mean to.
All right, any questions?
Yes, thank you. Obviously just starting to look at this, but first of all, I guess I'm kind of curious how leases work vis-a-vis the wildlife and fishery prohibition for requiring only transient boating down at City Dock.
That's a good question, and before you have a map. So the only areas where we can provide commercial leases because of the grant encumbrance is the Burtis Dock, the long dock, the Navy side of the short dock, which is where you see one of the I think they're called carpetbaggers, the Navy side of that short dock, that long dock.
Could you, I'm really having a hard time, could you pull the microphone closer?
Sure. So the only areas that we could provide commercial leases is that very long dock, which we call the Burtis Dock, a little segment of what we call the DNR dock that's directly adjacent to the Naval Academy, and then the Navy side of the short dock, which sits right next to the long dock on the Susan Campbell side.
And is that because there was no bulkheading done there?
Yes, so when we signed those land use agreements, it was for an X number of slips. And because Watermark already had existing leases that ran for 10 years plus, that was taken into account at the signing or prior to the signing. So those leases were permitted, and the rest of those slips had to be preserved.
I guess I don't understand, this is really trying to understand, not, because believe me, I know how we can really get all kinds of people upset, but how does anybody get a lease on any part that is more than 9 days on any part of the bulkheaded city dock?
No one could have a lease at the bulkhead. So other than that little portion, sort of half of that Burtis Basin, that's available for commercial leases.
The orange?
The yellow, but behind the orange, or the orange, yes, the orange, the yellow, both sides of that pier. Those are just showing you the existing leases, and the navy side of the short pier right next to it. Those are all available because they're not encumbered by that land use.
Right.
Everything else is encumbered. Everything
So,
else.
Again, how can they have a lease? How can Watermark, just to be direct about it,
Watermark was in their lease with 10-plus years of leases, as I understand it, I wasn't here, prior to acceptance of that grant, and that was taken into consideration.
I know, the grants were a long time ago. The first grant was before I even got on the council. I believe it was 2005. And the second grant was after I got on the council and I voted against it. So that was probably 2007. So that's a long time ago.
Yeah, I couldn't speak that far back in history. We could certainly
Yeah, no,
outsource
it's
to the
not, I
Office of
agree,
Law.
it's not on your watch, but I think it is an inconsistency. I actually think I saw a piece of handwritten paper, lined paper with Ellen Moyer's writing on it that led to this inconsistency, but I do think it makes us liable. We have other people that ask for leases, like to do fishing charters and things like that, and we're saying, no, no, no. We had the lady with the electric boats, no, no, no. But yet, we have this one organization, and again, I love Watermark Tours. I think they're part of the branding of the city of Annapolis. I'm not trying to throw a stick in their spoke, but I think we are being very inconsistent with the applying the rules about that are coming down through DNR from Wildlife and Fisheries and the contingencies. And that grant, those two grants, which were really for paltry amount of money for the amount of encumbrance, are encumbrances in perpetuity, as long as the structure lasts. So that means we will never have control of this part of the city dock as long as those bulkhead structures exist. And so I think this is, I mean, I'm glad you brought it to our attention, and I think it's raising some, I'll call them interesting questions that I think we need to pursue, and maybe we should all destroy these pieces of paper right now.
I think there is actually a deadline as to when those land use agreements end. And the reason I know this is because with the redevelopment of City Dock, we're actually going to push those dates out because this grant encumbered area won't be usable for 1 or 2 years. And so I know that we've discussed that with DNR, so I do know, I want to say 2027-ish.
The last time I read the grants, it said in there that these controls or these restrictions are for the life of the structure.
I had heard that as well, but the conversations we've had recently had a different flavor, and we could certainly reach out to
Yeah, well-
Office of Law to get clarification.
Yeah, well, and the mayor and I have been talking about it. We cannot have no control over our own city, harbor and dock, but that's a different issue. But, okay, well, what was your reason for asking for this, Mr. Chair?
Well, just to better understand, and so it sounds like because I think this was the first year, so we have I guess, new control over the Burtis dock, that short dock next to it, and then the DNR one you said in the orange.
Correct.
So this new program where we're the pilot, which we're leasing out. So I'm just thinking about it from a process standpoint, and I think would be nice, and thank you for all the answers. I think what might be nice for next year, in light of seeing how things go this year, is maybe having a process where we start to advertise earlier, get a number of proposals, because I would think hopefully there would be a number of people interested if we got the word out soon enough as far as utilizing this space for various purposes, be it educational or commercial. So if we could get that out and get some of these proposals, then we could evaluate them all at the same time and get recommendations. Either that could be done by your office, or you give recommendations to the council if we have to actually approve the leases, and we could then approve them en masse in, I don't know, in March or something like that, ahead of the season.
It's tricky, but what I would say, just to speak a little bit to Alderman Arnett, just to give you a little bit of perspective, the new Burtis Pier is 143 feet on each side.
I'm sorry, the what is?
The new Burtis dock is 143 linear feet on each side. The short dock is 40 feet long, and the Navy side can hold a 50-foot boat. The orange space adjacent to the Naval Academy that we call the DNR dock is another 40 foot of space. So while it may be a little frustrating that a lot of this is grant encumbered, I think as a city, our administration and our council members need to decide, like, how much do we want to be commercial? Do we want a lot more commercial? Because I can tell you, we turn away recreational boats every single weekend, and the demand is really there. So it's gonna be a careful balance. And I would remind you too, that the mayor has said, and I think that the council would probably echo this, that historic and educational ships are very, very important. So from January 1st to April 1st of every year, they have first dibs, and they can each get 4 free full weeks at that dock. And so so we're balancing a lot of needs. And I think we can make it all work.
Okay.
Well, I think the word that you used is correct, balance. And so I don't think anybody wants to see recreational use go away or even be a minority of the use. But, and I remember when David Gerald and I first talked about this, he came from San Diego, but obviously in the Navy, he was stationed on a lot of water. And he said he never saw a city that had no commercial enterprises to help people get off the dock and onto the water. And that's where we are. And I think that's something we need to think about. It's part of the whole attraction of the city of Annapolis, but it's a lot like some of our other issues with water access in a certain place where you can come to the water, but it's alleged we don't have riparian rights, so you can't get out on the water. But that's topic for a different meeting.
One other wrinkle to this is that the policy that Beth just mentioned, where the nonprofits have the ability to book their 4 free weeks, they could do that starting in January, and then they have till April 1st. That makes it difficult for someone contemplating a commercial lease to decide whether they're going to enter a commercial lease, and then for us to advertise it as available. I mean, we can advertise it, but we can't make any decisions till April 1st. Because the nonprofits still have that ability. The policy, right, that's the policy right now. So council may wish to reconsider that. Right. And whether they want to shorten that time. I would think that most nonprofits would know what their sailing schedule is, where they will be, where their other commitments are by at least March 1st. That, they still could later in the year, if the space was available, say, hey, can we come in
right.
X or Y, week? But we should maybe cut off that open preferential period a little earlier, so that if we are going to offer commercial leases, that actually can be a viable option.
Yeah, and I've been talking a lot with the educational people, and their statements are that they'd like to do their educational programs when the people are here, which is usually not the cold months. And so it's not really considered a boon to them to have the cold months when nobody's coming down to the dock. Now, the good news is global warming is going to take care of that, and there won't be any cold months anymore. But for the time being, it's not an opportune time for them.
And maybe you already understand, but for the benefit of everyone, just to be clear, they have booking rights from January 1st to April 1st, but they can book through the whole year. That's just when they have their first dibs.
Yeah. Well,
Is that set in the code?
No, it's a policy that was legally adopted.
yeah. Came before rules.
Oh, okay. Oh, an internal policy, okay. All right. All right, I think that's all I had. So, I mean, I guess the intention moving forward is to continue to do the pilot program for this summer, and then, is that ending at the end of the summer? Like, all those leases are,
It ends in August.
oh, it's okay.
And also, the pilot program was, we just offered 2 weeks for each business, 2 weeks of each month for each business. I think some of the frustration on their part has been that's not a good business model. You know, they'd rather be there for a full month at a time. But that's what the administration decided they were going to offer this year, to make it an even playing field for everybody, everyone to try to get a chance to get in for 2 weeks a month.
Okay. And so next summer, when do we look to start the city dock work? Do you think this will
January.
be open next, so it's not gonna be open next summer?
They're going to do this in phases, and I know that they're going to get up to kind of where the taxi stand is. I believe that's the current plan, is the first phase. So I don't know, Beth, if you have any other more updated information about how far they're going to get by summer.
Part of the issue is if we have signed leases, we have a signed lease with Watermark, so if we boot them out of their slip, is it incumbent upon us to then offer a space like Burtis for them to continue to do business? Or do we have a legal obligation to do that? We have to explore that.
Okay. Well, I guess what I'll suggest is maybe for sometime before next summer, it might be worthwhile coming before either this body, because we don't really have a dedicated maritime committee, right?
We have the Maritime Advisory Board.
Well, board, I'm talking about council committee.
Oh.
Well,
I
yeah,
think
go to
we're
the
the
board
closest.
too. Yeah, but I just either come before the committee or the council as a whole, just maybe to let us know what the plan would be for next summer, so we know. Like, as far as if you're planning on doing any more pilot leases, so we know what the approach is going to be for.
In that direction
season.
will definitely come from the mayor's office, as
Okay.
far as I can tell.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much for putting this together and for coming out. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Mr. Smith, you said you had a time deadline?
That's okay, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, you can come on up forward.
Come
I
on
don't think we
down.
have too many questions for you. And lucky, this might be your last time here until the new director gets here.
No, I think he'll be here in September, because I don't think Chris will be here.
Oh.
No, yeah, in fact, I talked to Chris
Do you have
earlier.
a copy for us?
I will have a final revised copy for you on Monday.
Okay.
Okay.
It will also be posted
I move that Tom comes back on Monday.
in Google, on the website, and in Granicus, I believe. I'll be sending that
Oh, it's on
Monday as
Granicus?
well. So mine is still, I do things the old school way.
Yeah. Well, I think just hit on the updates, and then I'm sure we'll have specific questions on specific projects.
Sure. Happy to. For the record, Tom Smith, Acting Planning and Zoning Director for another 2 months. Just going down the list, I think everybody, if you haven't been to 39 Hudson Street, the new Public Works building, it's fabulous. I think we're waiting for something on the elevator to get the UNO issued, but it's pretty much ready. I would say other city employees will be jealous of a locker room. at the shower to cycle to work. Continuing down further, more large-scale projects, the Bay Village 2 in your ward there, Alderman Savage, the grading permits have been in. We're trying to complete our review on those. Got some concerns with the grading and details around the tree, as you can imagine. So I'll be keeping that tight, so to speak. CRAB is, UNO is issued and open and running. That'll probably come off the list.
Were there any major changes at Bay Village from the previous
No,
proposals?
sir, not since the Planning Commission approval. It looks pretty good, but as always, the devil's in the details and construction and how are you going to build it around the tree, right? That's my concern. And I've got Brian Adams looking at that as well, as you can imagine. Park Place Hotel, construction continues to move along there. Parkside Preserve, they're moving into the single-family units now. The townhouses are getting close to completion. We've had some architectural revisions. I've been working with them on that just to comply with the plan development and the architectural detailing there. Pearl Place had a really good work session with the Planning Commission last fall, so they've submitted revisions. I hope to take them to Planning Commission for formal approval in September. I know they're really working hard on me for that.
How many
frankly,
units?
we would have already been there if I wasn't wearing dual hats in the department.
Yeah.
So if you
How
get
many
a-
units is that?
90 residential units over first floor commercial with structured parking under that, and then 68 townhomes.
So it's going to be mixed use then for part of it?
Yes, sir. Yeah, and we've had work sessions with the Planning Commission. We've had several sessions with the Greater Parole Community Association and Alderman Pendell Charles, and those have gone pretty well. I must admit, I don't always get excited about a development project, but this one has a lot of positives to the community and to the neighborhood. And the architects have really worked hard with us on site planning and architecture and how it fits the community and connecting it to Neal Farm project next door. Anyhow, I think if you haven't seen it, I can forward you some of the concepts. I think you'll like what you see there.
And I think you said they're complying with the known at loss, the new forest conservation.
Yeah, so there's so much invasives happening now on site since we started however many years ago on that project. So there's going to be a fair amount of invasives removal and reforesting to happen there on the steep slopes and so forth. Brian has been out and met with their arborist and concurs and has been through it all. So they have a lot of detail on forest conservation on that project. Just concern as to those invasives could continue to just loop over to others.
Have they gotten to the stormwater management part of that yet?
They have revisions to the stormwater management, and I haven't looked at that part of it myself. I've looked at it from a disturbance point of view, or limit, if you will, from my perspective in zoning, but I haven't looked at it from an engineering perspective yet, Alderman.
Okay. Yeah, I'd like to
Yeah,
get a copy of that
Sure.
grading plan.
sure.
Kevin, do you think you could ask Public Works to send that to me? Because last I saw, I think I had some concerns about the outfall.
Correct, yeah.
It was just more of a traditional design as opposed to a regenerative stormwater.
Yeah, they have the stream there, and they have some steep slopes and how it outfalls. Plus, you've got the existing outfall under Forest Drive. So yeah, there's a lot to that. Primrose School, I'm sure you've all been by it. It's under construction on Hilltop Lane and Spa Road. Rocky Gorge, this is I guess they call it Athens currently. They submitted a minor modification for architecture changes. And Alderman, you're aware that we also required an invasive management plan as part of that for the tornado damage. I just received that invasive management plan last week. So Brian and I will be looking at that. Kevin Haynes is the arborist working on that, which always makes me feel good when he's involved. Frankly, he's done a number of things over the years, and he's just good to work with and knows the city.
Good. What about, where are we in terms of entrance and egress out of there?
I'm glad you asked, Alderman. The applicant's legal counsel sent a second letter on June 28th to State Highway Administration with a request for a meeting to discuss the access. I think the original request was sent in March, and they hadn't heard back, so another letter was sent. I know that Alderwoman Finlayson is anxious to get a meeting on that, and the developer has agreed to, help facilitate that. And frankly, have had many discussions on that.
But where is it now? Is it right in, right out, or are they using Yall Road?
They're using Yall Road as the plan development was approved.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, sir. SPCA under construction. It looks well if you've been past it. I'm sure, Rob, you pass it. Sorry, Alderman Savage, you pass it regularly. Terrapin Station moving along under construction. The Willows on Forest Drive was approved by the Planning Commission. Got the opinion. The record plat was approved last week. I expect permits any day on that to get that moving. We don't want them to miss any deadline with their tax credits for that project.
So do they,
I know you heard a lot about that over the months from.
I was going to say, does that mean we won't see Tara for a while?
Hopefully, we've really worked to rush the record plat and get it ready and get it there, and the commission approved it.
what about like so they presumably still have to comply with the Forest Conservation Act, right?
Yes,
So probably, because most of it's not forested, I think they'd have to add some afforestation, is that right?
so they have some sliver of land on the opposite side of the American Legion that was once a part of the Riders Glen, if you recall, preserved but never put into a formal conservation easement. So that is going into formal conservation easement, and predominantly street trees are being used to mitigate and meet their forest conservation requirements.
Is that
there.
double dipping as far as Riders Glen used that to get their approval?
No, sir. I subtracted that out. I made sure
okay.
that didn't happen. Yes, sir. Good point. Right. But I did want to make sure it got permanently put into an easement.
Yeah,
we do things a little differently now than we did in the early 90s, right?
Yeah.
I'm dating myself now, right? Hillman Garage is complete. I hope everyone is enjoying that. The West Village, what we call 161 West Street, did receive its site design approval from Planning Commission, and those permits have been submitted, and we're looking at those now. The Village at Providence Point, the Planning Commission amended its opinion per the court order, and from what I understand, the prior appellant has already filed a petition to court again. So, but nonetheless, permits are still in the office, and we are still reviewing those. And that's it in a nutshell.
I think we skipped one called the Lofts at Eastport.
Yes, sir, I did. Jeff,
Mr. Lashinsky invited me to his very elaborate presentation last night, and instead I got to hear questions about the lofts and about when we're going to get zone parking in Ward 8 and things like that. So
my apologies. I skipped over a page. So Griscom Square, which is the corner of Tyler Avenue and Bay Ridge Avenue, started construction, but they found a mistake in the record plat. That's now been corrected and re-recorded and should be moving forward. Thomas Woods, which was under construction, but they had a utility issue. We are working with them to amend the utilities and the easements for that. And the Lofts at Eastport Landing, after many rounds, I have officially approved the adequate public facilities with mitigation. I did that on June 30th. I don't know if that will be appealed again or not, but I forwarded that out.
well, but that is the question I'm being asked. Has that been sent to the judge for her approval? Does she have any sign off?
I don't From what I'm told from a legal standpoint, no, it was remanded back to the Board of Appeals on 3 issues of adequate public facilities, police, transportation, and stormwater management. Then it's thus Board of Appeals remanded back to the city. We worked with each of those agencies, had a new traffic study conducted. We frankly met with transportation, public works, zoning, the traffic consultant the city hired, the public works traffic consultant, and we took the most restrictive requirements from the original study and the new study and applied them. And I also required a new crosswalk, pedestrian crosswalk over Chesapeake Avenue, like in the one at Burnside.
What about Americana?
It's at the crosswalk is at Americana, but over Chesapeake.
All right, and then up at Madison?
There's a crosswalk already was agreed to there previously. Yes,
Is
sir.
Madison where the stoplight is, or is Monroe the one that, where the buses are?
Madison, I believe, is the stoplight, already has crosswalks in Monroe. We required a crosswalk there and agreed to previously.
Okay, so the 10-minute trolley, is there a transit node in the shopping center?
There is a condition in the site design for what's called a multimodal area. So there is a bus stop currently on Chesapeake Avenue, and on the inside location, we are looking to create with that a multimodal, whether you want bicycle, charging stations, whatever you wanted to make that. So we're going to spend some time with the applicant when they get to that part of it on what that's going to be. I know Alderman Savage has an interest in the outfall, off-site outfall into the creek, which there's a condition for the applicant to design that. We have flexibility in the way we wrote that condition as far as participating in the design of that. So I hope you will give your thoughts to that.
That's a condition on,
The site design approval.
I'd like to go
Yes.
back to the 10-minute trolley.
Sure.
Because that was all part of the concept for the e-ferry and all of those things. But I talked to the owner, and he does not feel he's been approached for any use of the shopping center parking lot for people who would want to park and get on the 10-minute trolley. So, and I think that is something that's still up in the air.
It certainly is. Is that trolley going to stop at the city bus stop within the street, or is it going to traverse internally? We don't know that yet, right? I
I
haven't
don't think
seen.
anybody knows, but the
knows,
concept
but-
was it's going to
yeah.
be little jitneys that people
Yes.
will be able to hop on at the multimodal, whatever we're calling
Sure.
it. And I don't want the mayor to be disappointed when we find out that we can have the jitneys, but we can't park people in the parking lot. And what Mr. Letterberg told me is he doesn't think he has any extra parking, but he hasn't been approached. So
Right.
I'd say this more to the deputy city manager than to you, but this is,
I'll turn it.
no, one of the issues that's hanging fire. I understand what the mayor wants to do, and I appreciate it, but I think there's some loose ends here. But I also wonder if there isn't going to be follow-up. The other thing that I got relevant to Alderman Savage's point is complaints that the feeling was the mitigation for the outfall actually was a step backwards in terms of getting remediation there for Jones Cove and all of the scouring. I don't know, I haven't looked at the agreement, so I don't know what was part of the mediation for the outfall.
So the outfall was part of the site design approval as far as the requiring the applicant to pay for the design of off-site. And as I'm sure Rob's familiar, the storm, and I'm not a stormwater engineer, so
Neither are we.
first priority is to be managed on-site. So all the stormwater is being managed on-site. So the mitigation for their impacts exceeding the code is being managed on-site, and we can get with Public Works if you want the details on that. But in addition to all of that, they have to do this design for the outfall off-site. I know that there are a number of environmentalists in Eastport who have expressed their concern on that.
But wasn't a part of the original mediation, not mitigation. Wasn't that what the mediation agreed to, was design? The thing that Jackie Wells and Bill Reichert and Diane Butler were involved in, the mediation,
Not to my knowledge. I know Mr. Gutwald, when he was the director, was involved in that, and that was not part of the site design approval,
No, I
which
agree
came
with
out
you.
of mediation. It was
right,
after
but the
mediation.
mediation only was to pay for the design. It wasn't to pay for addressing the scouring and all of that.
Correct. A lot of came out of that mediation, right? I mean, architecture and so forth.
Just when I get emails and
Right. I understand.
stopped at meetings, I need to know where we stand.
So, well, and so with the stormwater, the APF language for stormwater is pretty weak as far as, it's not as comprehensive as I think what we would want. It's focused purely on providing adequate, basically pipe sizes, to make sure the pipes, the infrastructure can convey the water, when I think these days we're a lot more interested in ensuring that the outfall, where the water dumps into the creeks, if that's really adequate as far as not degrading the environment, not degrading the creek, causing more erosion, right? So the APF currently is not worded in a way that facilitates that. I think we should change that, put that on our list.
Why, we already have an external attorney changing all the APF code without any consulting with us. So
Apparently so,
I doubt that it's going to get stronger.
yeah. Well, it's not that much language. I might just add it to my legislative list. But the other part of that is the stormwater management code, which kicks in during grading permit review. And that's where I do think we also need to add something that makes it, I think there is discretion, which I think we might want to invite Public Works back at some point to talk about a number of Pearl Place and this one, or maybe I'll just do it individually, but the stormwater code doesn't really speak, it gives them discretion to require more stormwater management. I think they have the discretion to require more, but it doesn't specifically talk to, and it may vaguely talk about adequateness of outfall, but it doesn't really open the door enough as far as requiring the stable outfall and requiring stable conveyance. I think the county has some language along those lines that actually require installing a step pool stormwater conveyance system in all of their new outfalls, which I think we need to add.
Okay. I'm by no means a stormwater engineer. I know enough to be dangerous, but the stormwater report, I believe, does include, from an engineering aspect, those types of things, probably more along the lines of velocity. But I mean, as far as the shopping center, where you have zero management today on 6 acres, you'll have, a good portion of that now being managed. So theoretically, you're going to have less coming out the outfall after than post than pre, right? But your concern is the stronger the code, the better for those of us who apply the code.
And then the site design, the comments that you, presumably that you got included into the site design conditions regarding stormwater, does mention, what's it worded? I think watershed restoration.
Correct. Yeah.
So it uses
Correct.
that really, I think, opens the door to providing more than just outfall stabilization, but maybe work in invasive species management or.
Right. I use the
wetland
term
creation.
outfall, but you are correct. It talks about restoration, so it could mean more.
Yeah. So I guess those conversations where I think the public's a little confused because those conversations are really only starting, I think, right?
So that will all be part of the grading permit review.
Right.
But obviously you have to have conversations before so they know what they need to design to.
Expect, yeah. But that, I guess, will be up to Public Works, although presumably you.
Yes, sir. Yeah,
Let 'em know.
I'm sure you'll have several agencies
Yeah.
involved.
Okay.
Would you like to help out?
All right.
Okay.
Any other questions about that? Do you?
No, thank you for the update.
Sure,
Look forward
sure.
to the hard
Thank
Thank you,
copy.
Mr. Smith.
Thank you.
Ms. Gile, do you want to jump into your presentation? Do you have any deadline? We'll still try to get you out by 5, Mr. Lushansky, but. Okay, thank you. Do you want to jump into your report on resilience, since you're there?
Yes.
Make sure your mic is on.
Just to let you know, I know the Hawkins Cove.
Is your mic on?
Sorry, no, Jackie Bell, Deputy City Manager for Resilience and Sustainability. The Hawkins Cove work did kick off in June. We had the site meeting with the contractor, and Mike Rosberg in Public Works is the project manager, and so first part of this is not very exciting. There's a lot of surveying, topographical, hydrological surveys, looking where the infrastructure is, determining who owns what property, and to the extent we can, where we can, the limited disturbance can be for various reasons. So that's kicked off already. So that's phase one of the project, and that will be going through the fall. Let's see. The city did award for the third year $300,000 in stormwater mitigation and restoration projects through the Chesapeake Bay Trust. The city uses some of its watershed restoration funds to fund these grants, and these are it's a mixed bag of mostly design. Most of it's still in the design phase, microbiome retention practices in Georgetown East condos, the Crab Cove Shoreline Stabilization Project. Spa Creek Conservancy is working on Truxton Cove sub-watershed improvements. Fairwinds Condo Association is implementing stormwater controls where they have none. And Arundel Rivers Restoration is performing a retrofit of the Harness Creek Pond. And all of these help us towards achieving credits towards our stormwater mitigation efforts and impervious surface requirements, reduction requirements. So this is very helpful that these outside organizations, homeowners associations, et cetera, take on these projects, but it's funded with city funds. Let's see, I'm gonna hit down what's going on here. Tree canopy was something that Alderman Arnett was especially interested in, where we are, how we're meeting that. We did have a presentation, it's a very good presentation that Brian Adams, the city forester, and our chief comprehensive planner, Mr. Lashinsky, have made to different groups, and it explains where we are, why we're there, why we're not achieving our goal as quickly as we would like, and the rationale behind their consideration of kind of changing the tree canopy goals to be more realistic. And I spoke with the city forester today again, and he would like to make that presentation, and perhaps you can fit him in for September.
Kaylin, Ms. Jackson, could you add that to September?
If we can stay here for a second, though, because this will come up again when we're discussing the comp plan.
Right.
It seems like reducing the canopy is antithetical to the introductory paragraphs in the comp plan about how important trees and that whole diagram of what things are doing, and something I feel remiss about, but I hope my colleague does too, in that I would like to strengthen the city code for not allowing carte blanche removal of trees in backyards.
And that would help. Certain code revisions could help us with retaining these large trees that provide so much canopy cover. The city forester every year asks for more funds to plant trees and for tree maintenance, and consistently he does not receive what he asks for. So it makes it very difficult for him to perform tree maintenance on some larger trees that are, again, are very important to tree canopy. He also has difficulty in finding places to plant trees. Sometimes public property public works will say you cannot plant trees here or there because of easements for utilities, et cetera. I think there's a real opportunity on school properties within city limits. When we approached the school board a few years ago, it was a non-starter with them. But I still think that's something we should pursue. It's one of the few areas where we have open area that's, there, and plenty of space for trees where the students could use the trees for outdoor activities, for shade, especially it's getting warmer and warmer. And spectators around sporting events on weekends even could utilize the trees. Again, we have increasing temperatures, so I think it's something we should pursue.
They do it at St. John's. They have enormous
schools,
trees, and they
yeah.
still can do croquet and everything else.
Right.
So for the comp plan, I'd really like to see a renewed effort to the schools, but another, I think, area that's really ripe for planning is public housing.
Yes, and several years ago, when we were before Newtown 20 completely came down, we spoke with HACA while they were there, and they were very open to, they thought it was a great opportunity to plant trees there. They had more trees many years ago. The thinking, I don't know, it was in the 80s or the 90s, was that trees provided cover for, for things we don't want to happen in the shadows. But the thinking in police enforcement now is that when you have trees, you bring people out on the street, especially in the summer, and they become eyes on the street. So the police department is also very much in favor of tree planting in those communities, and there are lots of spaces to plant them.
It just makes the quality of life as well as the environment
Right.
so much better.
Carbon capture, stormwater mitigation, aesthetics, property values go up, especially in
Cooling.
lower income neighborhoods.
The cooling that trees bring with
Exactly,
the
the cooling effect, reducing the
that
urban
whole
heat.
diagram in the comp plan is, that's why it's like, wait a minute, we're saying about how wonderful and we're going to reduce, but we need to work on that legislation. I have
99%.
constituents who have told me they've cut down their trees already because they're worried that we're going to not let them
Preemptive
cut them down
attack.
for free. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
huge trees, specimen trees
Sure.
in
And-
backyards have gone away.
And the English ivy also is a big problem. Again, Mr. Adams does not have English ivy removal in his budget. This group that was started, Save Our Trees, in the last year, they've helped him tremendously. I have this in my report, they've performed 23 English ivy removal events, either themselves or supported other groups at, I think it's 17 different locations throughout the city in just 1 year. So I've asked Ms. Hodo to try to find them some community grant funding through the city, as well as working with the trust, because they are helping the city quite a bit and saving some of our larger trees, because they're going after the larger canopy trees, which are much harder to replace, obviously. But I think
So I believe the city manager for next year's budget. Can't we fight for a lot more money? I guarantee I will support that in the budget.
for Mr. Adams' budget,
Yeah, I mean,
Well,
It
He's-
should be in rec and parks too. I mean, rec
Yeah.
and parks should be doing this as a routine part of their maintenance and their facilities, and they're not, because they're not
Yeah.
prioritizing it, because I guess we're not prioritizing
yeah,
it.
we let it slip. The budget is 99.9% done by the time it gets to us, but it isn't when the city manager sees it. And so I would encourage anybody who knows him to try to push for more money in the budget.
duly noted.
for
Yes,
these things.
And I have made that point, and I know Mr. Adams requests the money every year, and he never receives as much as he needs. I think Mr. Lashinsky's dying to jump in.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, I would say I'm glad that you're scheduling the tree canopy discussion for September, because that could just be the full time of your meeting. And we did give that presentation to the Environmental Commission, and it should get your comments as well, because we've spent quite a bit of time, myself, comprehensive planner Casey Ortiz, for the record, Eric Lashinsky, Chief of Comprehensive Planning. But we've spent quite a bit of time with Mr. Adams talking about what we can do to both stem the loss of tree canopy and expand it. And we have a lot of recommendations in the comprehensive plan. Some of what you mentioned, some of them already, the heritage tree law, increased funding in different ways, working with housing authority and school system. We've done quite a bit of mapping to identify where we think the potential locations are for new canopy within different land use types. And so there's a map that I'll show in a bit. But it's
But
no
for me,
easy
the-
solution. What we're trying to do is hold the canopy we have. We just can't, we're not able to hold on to what we currently have, which is really discouraging. And so I'll explain why the goal that we have for urban tree canopy, it's not that we're lowering what we have. It's just we're lowering the goal that we have. And so from the 2009 plan, we were trying to get to we inherited a goal of getting to 50% tree canopy coverage for the city. We're at about a little under 42% now. And we've been losing ground.
We are.
That's actually that's based on figures that are prior to COVID. Brian Adams is working on getting an updated inventory right now that would tell us what happened over the last 3 years, but we're worried because of, for obvious reasons, a lot of home improvement projects during COVID, and but we scrutinized where the 50% number came from, and we found that 45% would be much more realistic and still, believe it or not, still aspirational, given where we are and looking at other comparable cities. One thing we would share in the September presentation is we found a really good precedent in Cambridge, Massachusetts. It's very different than Annapolis, much more urban, obviously, but they recognize a need to invest in their tree canopy, and they have a variety of measures that we could look at that are scalable, I believe. So different. They have a different city budget, of course, but in terms of the staff, they added the planning kind of urban forest master plan they did that really zeroed in on the places where they could plant and how they could achieve that, and the sort of budget influx that they did. So we are taking it very seriously. I guess I would liken this to the situation we're in with the Chesapeake Bay pollution, where we're not meeting the goals that were set years ago by 2025 because they weren't realistic, or they weren't met with.
I don't agree with them doing that either.
Yeah.
I mean, because they keep lowering the goal, but we can't even meet the lower goal as far as the Bay, which means really we need to revisit our actions as far as doing more.
Yeah.
Like for the tree canopy, because I know we have 2 studies now, the original 2000, whatever it was, 6 or 8, and then we did one a couple of years back with the Environmental Commission and I think the Chesapeake Conservancy. Both reports said, well, you got the potential to go beyond 50%, and they chose 50 in the initial report because they thought it was feasible by looking at the data. And I just don't think there's a compelling reason to lower it. Because, I mean, so what? If we still have 50% and we get to 45, 46, that's still good, but why not keep moving forward?
Especially since you use the word aspirational. And
Yes.
I would rather aspire to a more lofty goal. We know that the Bay, I mean, as long as Pennsylvania keeps, and we're hoping that, what's her name will,
Bevan.
Bevan will stop sending us their chicken manure, but, well, we can talk about it in the comp plan, but I think that setting high standards and then holding the council, when it comes to the budget, feet to the fire, saying, you guys have to be partners in this, and you're not speaking up, and I didn't on the budget. But if you really want us to reach these aspirational goals, you've got to do something. One of the few prerogatives we have left after we delegated all of our authorities on everything is the budget. And I didn't, and I'm remiss, but I think I would rather be aspirational. But we can talk about that when we get to the
There's one more hole in the budget this year, which I pushed and pushed on, but Replant Annapolis was not funded in the budget this year. Last year was our first, well, I think it actually started the year before, but we didn't get it kicked off until FY '23. $30,000 was allocated to them.
Yeah.
They planted most of the trees in the city, more than Mr. Adams was able to plant, because they could do it on private property. And they trained people about planting trees and how to plant trees in the process. And the Watershed Stewards Academy did this as a partnership with the city. Now, we finally paid them the $30,000 they expended out of the Watershed Restoration Fund. And Public Works thinks they can do that again. Mr. Adams is working with Betsy McEwen, who manages that fund, to make sure that we can have a program up and running. But we missed spring planting because we had no money for it and no plans for it. So no spring planting was done under that program, which does help us immensely. We're hoping to get money in hand from Public Works through the fund, that Watershed Restoration Fund, to do a fall planting, but it's not in the budget. And there should be funds allocated either out of planning and zoning or out of Public Works for Replant Annapolis, because it's proved in 1 year to help us immensely with planting trees.
Maybe we need a new fee. I mean, we have the Forest Conservation Fund, which might be able to be used for some of this. I'd have to look at, but or we just create a new fee, and I don't know. It's kind of like any project would have to pay a certain amount just to go towards collectively increasing the tree canopy.
I like that idea, but I think we fell down. I fell down anyway in the budget time. Had some other things going on, but I think this is very important, and I think it's not just the environment. I think it's quality of life issues, and I note to self next year. But I will argue that we shouldn't back off the aspirational, even though I understand your point of view about being realistic. I just think it sends a bad signal to back off.
Well, maybe one approach would be to add, sorry, a bit of a side note, but add a fee to the watershed fund that we get, or to the water bill.
It's so small. I mean, it's
It
a
is.
ridiculous amount, $19 a quarter. It's
Yeah,
like-
I mean, add $5 to it to either go to the watershed fund and we allow the watershed fund money to be used for tree planting, or we make a whole separate fund.
Planting and maintenance. I mean,
But
that's the other.
it seems
big-
like it makes sense to just enable the watershed fund to be able to be used for tree plantings. Maybe limit the percentage of the fund that can be utilized in that manner, just because we already have that mechanism.
That's how Director Johnson interpreted it, that because trees provide stormwater mitigation benefits, that we could use that fund, because we didn't,
Yeah.
it came in, mid-cycle when we got this request from Replant Annapolis. From the Watershed Stewards Academy, we created Replant Annapolis. But there was no line item ever established for the program. So, and Ms. McEwen agrees with that. That fund could be used that way.
Yeah,
It's-
we did change the wording a couple of years
Yes,
ago.
the wording was revised a few years ago to make it broad enough that we could interpret it pretty broadly and include programs like this.
That means Mr. Adams he's probably able, through the administration, just to submit a fund transfer from water, or maybe even doesn't even need a fund transfer, but anyway, to whatever mechanism is needed to use the watershed fund money to go towards this.
I think that's where it's headed.
Another conversation that, again, is a budget issue is Mr. Adams enough? I mean, it seems to me like he has a lot of work. Yeah, so we need to, there's where I think we need more realism. We give a person a workload that is unmanageable. It's just way too big, and then expect miracles to be worked. So we have to get on it in our duties regarding the budget and the staffing.
Well, we could use, since we've updated the wording, then we could technically use the watershed fund money to pay for another Brian.
Yeah, if I
We do have
may,
stormwater.
one thing I've noticed since being here, I've spent a lot of my time on trails projects, which consume a tremendous amount of time because every location is very specific. You're negotiating with adjacent property owners. You're doing lots of grant management and coordination with various entities. And the tree planting, I think, is very similar, to actually do it well, to identify locations that are going to be long-term investments for the canopy and have stewards. It's very time intensive. And so staffing is really critical, I think, to,
Yeah.
It is, but I think the citizens across the wards, but I know it's very strong in my ward, I believe it's in yours too, care about this.
yeah, no,
And-
absolutely.
And so I think that when we talk about increasing the fee and we talk about increasing staff, I think we are in pretty safe ground. We talk about increasing the number of police officers. We know we're on safe ground there. They'd like 1,000 more. But I think this is another one where I think we'd get a lot of support. But our bad, I think we need to speak up. And we'll take any prodding we can get from you when it comes time to do that. But Brian, I watched, he is working very hard. So, all right.
All right, well, thank you. Yeah, a good discussion. We're getting a little ahead of ourselves. We get back to Ms. Giles.
Okay, I'll keep it brief. So I already covered Save Our Trees, which was part of this. We are wrapping things up with our electric vehicle strategic plan development, which will address buses, light-duty trucks, our inspection vehicles, waterways, all kinds of ways we can be green, including like our equipment such as weed whackers and things like that. So I will have a draft report on my desk by August 3rd, and then something that I can share with City Council by the end of August.
So will that have target dates for?
And part of that is to establish target dates with budgets
Okay.
assigned so that we can use it as a planning document as we go into each budget cycle, so we know how much our fleet manager or Department of Transportation should be requesting to get to each goal.
Yeah, I think maybe that should be good, I think, to come to the council for approval. Talk about that more.
Maybe not for approval, but at least reminding us. I mean, just like everybody else, you two for certain, we have a lot on our plates
Right.
too. So sometimes just a general reminder rather than getting into a whole approval rigmarole would be a good thing, I think.
Okay, well, plan will definitely be provided to council, and we can do a presentation on it at some point. Speaking of things that wrapped up, the military installation resilience review was finalized in the last month. It is available on our website electronically, but I also have hard copies for all city council members, which I will be mailing out with a short cover letter on it to tell you what it is. And this was the project where we looked at the vulnerabilities and challenges and opportunities to build resilience between the installation, the city, and the county, and with the goal of mission readiness, but also improving the integrated resilience of all of us we rely on each other for roads, et cetera. So it's about 150 pages, but not all of that is something you have to read. I think the action report part of it is the most pertinent part, and I'll point that out in the cover letter. So you'll be receiving that, well, probably next week. To make a note about that. And then we are making, as we move towards zero waste in the city, July is Plastic-Free July in Annapolis. We have information on the website about how you can live without plastic, reduce plastic use. And Ms. Hoda will be having a table event outside Market Space next week with information and giveaways such as water and paper boxes and different things like that. And then next month, we will be promoting pollinators with bee-friendly, BEE-friendly Annapolis. Brian Callahan and Ms. Hodo and I did go to Easton last month. They have a pollinator garden at one of their solar park is much, much smaller. It's about 10, 15 acres, but they put it in 2 years ago and it is flourishing. And we have some really good ideas about how you implement them, how you maintain a solar park, being mindful of the habitat that establishes itself there, and that you can actually plant between the arrays without interference. There's some weed whacking involved, but you can get a lot more done there. So there were National Fish and Wildlife staff at this event as well. This was like an open house event where they invited people to come. And so we have some contacts for wait to find out ways to do this for some funding. Perhaps Novus Renewables, who runs the solar park, is interested in a test site. They had originally spoke to the city about a very small, like third of acre, but that's really not a great, enough to do a test site. Fish and Wildlife recommends 10 acres at the least. I don't know that we can do that, but it's something much larger than a third of an acre to do that. And this, and the budget did include around $28,000 for a test site for pollinators, which I think is probably adequate to do a test site. And also, speaking of pilots, the Department of Transportation approached me. They're very interested in composting. And as you know, the city has done a pilot program with curbside pickup in Hunt Meadows. We have a drop-off site in Truxton Park, which Annapolis Compost is contracted to the city to do the pickup of the materials to take somewhere else for composting. And the city has tried to interest the county in a composting facility. They're not interested right now, so that we're kind of tabled that discussion. Marsha Patrick works with the county on that. However, the Department of Transportation wanted to start composting. So what we've come to, we think we've come to this decision to do a pilot program with Department of Transportation being the first building to do composting, and probably working with Annapolis Compost again. And then see how that goes. We have to set a period of time for the pilot and then extend it to all city buildings. So we're looking at how much that would actually cost the city and, how effective it would be.
And a lot of this is in the comp plan, so it's like we're paralleling.
So we're implementing already. We're going forward with things in the comp plan.
Well, thank you.
And then on my reports, I do have improved hiking, biking trails to Truxton Park, which is very timely because this was already on my report. And then Eric and I had a discussion about it, and then a conversation with the Chesapeake Conservancy today about pursuing grant funding. And I'll let Eric talk about it since this is your project.
Well, it's been obviously on our minds for several years. There's tremendous amount of erosion at Truxton Park along Spa Creek, and the images are just incredibly graphic. If you've been out there, you've seen it. We have been working with nonprofit Mid-Atlantic Off-Road Enthusiasts. They're a mountain biking group. They have no interest in turning Truxton Park into a mountain biking circuit, but what they do is they assist in improving environmental conditions in places that could take pressure off, places where they do mountain bike. So they've been helping, they flagged some trail rerouting to sort of take people away from the most eroding areas, to temporarily move trails to upland areas at Truxton Park so that we can then focus on stabilizing the slopes that are eroding. And that component is, we anticipate a very expensive project. So we met with the Chesapeake Conservancy, who is going to be assisting us with a grant application to the Land and Water Conservation Fund, federal program that, I think the anticipation is we would be pursuing $1 million. It has to have a 50% match, but we have other sources of funding that have gone towards Truxton Park already that we think we can leverage.
Yeah.
So
I think that's great, and it's been long needed. A couple things. The detour upland trail, there's already one there. They utilized about 10, 15 years ago. They had when they did work. Mm-hmm. I think it was for stabilization. Mm-hmm. So that shouldn't need too much additional work to put in. Mm-hmm. But the other thing would be, can you include in this some training for rec and parks? Because I feel like I'm not overstating it too much when I say they don't do much trail maintenance. Sometimes the conditions of those trails are horrific and overgrown. You can't even walk in Truxton Park. I don't think, so there's that, but there's also, I don't think they know what kind of maintenance could and should get done just to prevent the erosion. Park Service does it on their trails as far as making sure the water doesn't wash down the trail. You do put in little diverting berms, that kind of thing. As far as looking to the future, I think that could help in addition to, I think what you have in mind is the critical erosion that's happening right next to the shoreline.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. There is a recommendation in the comp plan for that kind of training, maybe like a professional development type. It's actually a little bit more broad, it's generally for green infrastructure maintenance, so that
Yeah.
for maintaining stormwater projects and knowing how to lead them, for example.
Yeah.
So this grant that the Chesapeake Conservancy is helping the city with is due on the 31st of this month. So we will be seeing a draft next week. Eric and I will review it, and Rosalind Johnson as well. And hopefully we can get that. Also, Moore's work on the trails is another match. It'll be viewed as a match
Right.
for the city towards the $1 million. I think we have, between other funds that have been allocated to other projects and Moore's work, I think we more than contribute a 50% match, probably. So I think it's a good project.
I'd be curious to know what kind of tech approach they're using for.
I can
The
send you the,
restoration, stabilization.
we actually went through the process of getting the Critical Area Commission approval already, which was,
good.
so I can send you what we shared with them.
Yeah, it'd be great.
And it would be a very primitive path, just, minimizing
path.
disturbance to
Yeah.
any significant
Yeah.
vegetation.
The last thing I want to mention is, the work with the Resilience Authority we're doing. I know that you had asked Matt Fleming to be here today, but he had another presentation to make. So I think he's being asked to be rescheduled to September.
Yeah, can you add that to September to Matt Fleming?
And I think that's good timing because he's pursuing a number of grants for the city right now and other projects. And so he may have some things in hand. Okay. So he may be further along with being able to report on some of the work that he's doing. There's a grant, a maritime resilience planning grant for the, for Eastport, including more of the Back Creek watershed in that grant. And then there's another one that's a regional climate pollution reduction grant that the city of Annapolis and Anne Arundel County are part of, will be part of a 8 kind of city-county group, Baltimore, Washington area kind of grant, climate, that's air pollution kind of game. In that one, it's about $1 million for the first part of the grant, then you can apply for implementation. And then they also, the Resilience Authority is working with the city on Cars Beach funding
Yes.
and Cars Beach planning. They already have a design, and they can combine that, I think I've mentioned this before, with work at Jonas Green Park and realize some efficiencies of expense and time to get those projects moving this summer. And then I sent a message to Burr, and I sent a message to Mr. Vogel, and I sent a message to Matt to consider solar infrastructure, because that is resilience infrastructure for our energy grid. Because we talked about the need to put more solar on all city buildings. We've got a lot of structures that would be perfect for that. The Public Works shed, the secondary building there is an example, or in their parking lot. When you build the solar carports, they're easy to construct. They also provide shade for the parking underneath of them, which is good for EV vehicles. It doesn't drain the battery as fast if they have some shade. But we have, parts of Pit Moyer, our police stations, fire stations could be good places, schools, public libraries, lots of big flat area rooftops where we could be putting solar arrays. So that's something I want him to see if he would explore with us to find funding, or if he knows of any grants that the city could pursue on its own.
Yeah, and that'll also be something we get into with the comp plan is the solar renewable energy part. Well, so if you have time, it'd be great if you could stay for the at least part of Mr. Lashinsky's, if you have any input. But Mr. Lashinsky, are you finished, Ms. Scott?
Yes.
Can I
Yes.
just do one quick thing? I got a request, remember we went over to the DNR building, I guess it was, with all of the bird things to keep the birds
Oh,
from-
right.
So I got a request from someone to sponsor legislation. I'm not sure how many problems we have in the city with that, but I'm happy to.
Bird strike, yeah.
Bird strike,
on
yes.
windows, preventing
Right.
that.
I have some drafted already.
Do you? Okay, good. Hey, my work here is
It's in
done.
the queue.
Okay, I'll put it on the list.
And actually, Ms. Gild's taken a look at it. And I think Planning and Zoning's also looked at it.
Okay.
So they should be ready soon. Too much to do.
One other point for you, Mr. Chair, but for Kalen is, I think we ought to put on every city council committee agenda for September or October their thoughts about things that are relevant to their area to go into the city budget early on. So like, we can talk about the things that I admitted being remiss about, thinking about, like support for Brian Adams and those sorts of things. The system isn't set up for us really to be part of the budget. It's sort of handed to us after it's all done. But I think we can be a little more proactive in our scheduling to at least talk about it early on before the budget starts its
February?
formulation.
March,
No,
February,
I think we
January?
should be doing it in October
October.
before, because Jody sends out the instructions in November to the departments. That's really when it starts to get locked in. And I think we need to be talking about the things that we thought should have been in the budget and didn't have time to consider. So
Ms. Jackson, could you
I
add that?
think we need to propose that to our colleagues on the council, but,
Well, we can start with our committee. And,
yeah.
all right, thank you. All right, Mr. Lashinsky, floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I'm going to burn through quite a bit because we've been talking about this, some of this came up in the Transportation Committee yesterday, but I do want to obviously answer questions along the way. So if you've been digging into the comprehensive plan and you have questions, comments, please feel free to interject. But I'm excited to be having this draft plan out on the street, so to speak, and it's getting circulated and we're getting comments and, through various means. We have a dedicated website set up. That's a primary way for people to comment on the plan. We've been getting emails through council members and directly to our staff, and we've been starting our in-person meetings. So thank you to both of you for being at the last night's event at the Hillsmere Library. And we have 2 more next week, Mount Olive Community Life Center in Parole and the West Street Library. So environmental concerns are really threaded throughout the comprehensive plan. So it is challenging to really summarize in a short amount of time. But when you look at the table of contents here, I would say that there's environmental concerns in the municipal growth chapter, the land use chapter, the transportation chapter, the community facilities chapter, and then probably most substantially in the environmental sustainability and water resources chapters at the end. When you look at the guiding themes of the comprehensive plan, equity, health, resilience, those are all reinforced by our environmental policies. And so those should be present throughout. In the demographics chapter, I just want to emphasize, as I've done many times already, that social vulnerability plays a big part in how we anticipate or measure whether we're being equitable. We want to understand where the communities are in the city that will have a harder time adapting to environmental challenges. In some ways, when you look at this type of data, and this is data based on the Center for Disease Control metrics, what they call the social vulnerability matrix, and it's based on socioeconomic factors, housing types, transportation availability, household composition, minority status, and language. This becomes a proxy for understanding environmental justice issues in the city where, we might not have large industrial complexes next to neighborhoods, but we have larger transportation corridors next to communities, or we have lack of access to water resources in some of these high social vulnerability communities. So the darker areas on this map are the more socially vulnerable communities, and this darkest one is Clay Street community close to College Creek. So that's a data that you will see underlying a lot of other maps in the comprehensive plan. Just going to kind of run through how we talk about this in land use. The guiding policy for land use that I think distinguishes this comprehensive plan from past comprehensive plans is we see in this plan opportunities to improve land use throughout the city. It's not just about guiding growth towards specific parts of the city. It's about guiding growth towards specific properties that are underperforming in various ways, among them environmental performance. So think of, large outdated shopping centers with large parking lots, don't have any stormwater management, or parking lots next to creeks that don't have any stormwater management. When you look at our future land use map, which is really the most important exhibit in the whole comprehensive plan because it sets the vision for the kind of land uses that we see as highest and best use, so to speak. You can see a lot of green on here, and that's very deliberate. We created a new land use designation called environmental enhancement areas, and this was basically acknowledging that there are lands throughout the city that have been embedded within other land use types, whether residential or commercial or industrial or institutional, that were really off the map. And many of these lands are marginal in nature. They may not be developable, but by not seeing them, we couldn't really plan with them, and they do add value to adjacent properties. They have enormous ecological benefits in most cases. So these environmental enhancement areas are the bright green areas on the map, and the dark green ones are what we call recreational enhancement areas. And those are primarily our existing parks, but also schoolyards where we see opportunities for additional recreation amenities that could be provided to adjacent communities. So this is a pretty big distinction. And then the red areas are mixed use areas. And that's relevant to environmental concerns because on these red mixed use parcels, there's an opportunity to consolidate land use and be more efficient in how we develop. So we can kind of transition from land uses that take up more space for impervious and maybe are more walkable and have a more urban character along major corridors of the city. So you can see most of these red areas are on Forest Drive, West Street, the downtown area, Bay Ridge Avenue are major corridors, Old Solomon's Island Road.
Can I interrupt? Can you explain to me what you mean by consolidate?
Sure. When you look at the way the city has developed over time, we started. We actually have a great map in the introduction chapter of the comp plan that shows how the city has grown over time. We started with a very small historic downtown core, and then it grew exponentially. It seems after 1950. The development pattern changed significantly with the automobile. We lost all our trains. We built around the car, and with that came a lot more asphalt and a lot more single uses. So I would say just kind of a suburban model where you put residential here, you put commercial here, you put industrial here, you kind of separate everything. Over time, we've kind of come back. Euclidean zoning, and no reference to Euclid. It was based on a Supreme Court case from Euclid, Ohio. But yeah, that's been the development pattern, and it's not to say that having residential areas that are primarily residential is a bad thing, but in certain parts of the city, there's an opportunity to combine compatible uses. So you could have housing next to retail, as we do downtown or in Eastport or in parts of West Annapolis and parts of Parole, and that kind of so consolidating simply means not necessarily spacing things apart, but thinking that things can be closer together and combine, and where it makes sense, where things are compatible, so you can walk to places much more easily. In fact, I met a couple at our event at Pitt Moyer the other night, a Tuesday night, our in-person event for the comp plan, that live on Tyler Avenue, right near the intersection with Forest Drive, and they're eagerly interested in what's going to happen with the old Annapolis seafood site, and there's another vacant site across the street, and they simply said, we just want to be able to walk to places like you can do in Eastport. that was their appeal. So I often say that one thing that everybody seems to agree on is they want Annapolis to be more walkable, and it's not surprising that the most expensive parts of the city are those that are more walkable, and that's really a big desire. So
I have another comment on that
yeah,
before you go to the next slide.
yeah.
I like the environmental enhancement areas. Glad to see that a part of the comp plan, because I think you're right. It really helps those areas to stand out. And I think there's an area even between environmental enhancement and some of the redevelopment, and in particular some of the areas you've identified as mixed use. Because what I'm trying to get at is there are parking lots out there where I think there'd be value to identifying as areas where, I don't know what you want to call it, maybe adaptive reuse. Some of the like for example, the Giant shopping center in Hillsmere, you have in pink is mixed, which is good, but again, even if we can get them to be more mixed use with the structured parking that you identify in the infill list, we still should have room to remove some of the surface parking, and put in stormwater management facility, for example. Because again, those facilities they were grandfathered because they were built before the state or city stormwater regulations. And we can't lose sight of, and now I know if there's a significant redevelopment, they'll have to comply with the new regulations. But I think if there is no significant redevelopment, because we don't know what the property owners are going to do, is there a way we can identify those areas as priority for some kind of adaptive reuse, be it for a mobility center or stormwater management or whatever, even housing in some situations, perhaps. I don't know. Just I think I'd prefer the first two, but yeah, I don't know if there's a different shade, different designation that might help bring, or maybe there's something else in the plan that speaks to that.
Well, we definitely do have recommendations about the intermediary stormwater management at those types of locations. I think it's in the environmental sustainability chapter. But let me give that some thought, because we did carve out plenty of sub areas, so to speak. Like the dark green areas at many of the schools were not identified as recreation spaces. They were just all institutional prior. So it's not a crazy idea. I think, and it's not that we have that many of those types. So I think there might be some case for that.
When you've identified them elsewhere in a different manner, I think just looking at impervious surface centers, I think you mentioned Parole elsewhere, and the Growls and Eastport Shopping Center. And anyway.
So I've been thinking about the Giant, because it's in your ward, not mine, a lot. But one of the things that I've been trying to get a feel for in the comp plan, and this is like trying to eat an elephant. There's just so much here. But one of the things that I'm going to be talking about and asking for is, this is an aspirational document, but it's also a document that I think is calling for change. And I think these are things where there can be cues. So I've looked at these performance things. There could be cues to the council for legislative rewrite. So I talked with both of you about all of the parking. We can give the owners of the parking, you can only have this much, you can't have more, and you have to make it impermeable However, we have a deal for you. If you will do it into a mixed use with still the stormwater and tree canopy and so on, we will make it easier for you in the zoning code to do that mixed use kind of thing. And that kind of brings us into it. It makes us partners in this whole process of where's the role for the council to help enact the comp plan. And I've been thinking about it a lot. I'm still trying to wade through it. In fact, now I've taken to just doing the reading the implementation for each section, and then I'll go back and read all the verbiage because there's just so much. But the implementation is really where the rubber meets the road. That's how the comp plan becomes real.
Yeah.
And so I figured I'm going to focus there first and see what I think about those recommendations. But I think this notion of giving us the cues for how we in future councils help make the 2040 plan come into reality is something I'm going to argue. And I know it's more work. I get it. And I saw you last night slaving doing all of that stuff for 14 people, most of whom hadn't read the plan.
I think we may have gotten to
Many-
20 people.
Many of whom wanted to joan on the alderman instead of you for a change. But still, I think thinking about how we go from concept to reality, transitional section is something that I think can make it more of a real living document. But just a thought.
Well, you know, with all the emphasis on mixed use, we do provide performance standards that decision makers in the city should use to evaluate whether a project is good or not. You know, planning commission, city council, staff, community members, section on green infrastructure here. You know, clearly this building at Westgate Circle is not going to be appropriate for every part of the city, but it actually meets most of these standards. It's one of the few buildings in the city that has a green roof, has incredible tree canopy around it. So we are interested in high quality design at any new development site, and that's really, really important in sort of setting what those expectations are for new development. And new development is primarily going to be infill development. It's, in sense, infill means taking existing sites that may have had another use in the past and finding a new use for them. And with all of those infill development, redevelopment opportunities come opportunities to improve the environmental functioning of the site. So this is the Spa, former Public Works facility at Spa Road. I mean, clearly, you know, we can do a lot better there with whatever is coming for that site. But environmental value, you know, where is the site in proximity to our creeks and watersheds? That's really should be a important consideration when we think about infill development and the opportunity to improve the site. We do identify about a dozen high-profile, large infill sites that we envision either transitioning in the next 10 to 20 years or would like to spark a transition. Many of these shopping centers, there's no indication that they're going to be changing anytime soon, but we hope that by including them in this comp plan and identifying them and providing some basic considerations that perhaps the ownership and communities around them could start the discussion about what should come next. So like the Bay Ridge Shopping Center, for example, that you were mentioning, we just provide bullet points for these sites. We don't really get into the densities or the details, but a lot of the recommendations are things that are really specific to where these sites are located. So I encourage anybody who's watching this to look at the comp plan and see what we recommend. We also talk about creek sheds as an important framework for small area analysis planning in the city, and that's basically following this comp plan. It's typical to look at smaller parts of the city, neighborhood scale areas of the city. And we think there's value in looking at that based on watersheds so that that becomes a more relevant, I'd say maybe not relevant, top of mind consideration when making, I would say that a lot of people I meet do not know which watershed they live in. It's problematic, I think, because it's just our daily behaviors contribute to the health of the watershed. And here in Annapolis, everything seems to be based on the quality of our water. So I know it might be strange to use these types of boundaries for small area planning that have historically been based on neighborhood boundaries or corridors, but in Ellicott City, after their damaging floods a few years ago, they did something like this. They based their whole master planning on urban watershed, and I think that's a model for what we could do here. We have a greenways plan that shows up in probably 4 different chapters in the document. I saw Earl Bradley from the Sierra Club last night, and he's probably spent 2 hours just looking at this alone, and he's really excited about the potential to start making. I mean, a lot of these linkages were recommended by the Annapolis Conservancy Board and various other stakeholders, and I think the next step is to actually start piecing them together. So we're going to want to work with the Conservancy Board on that.
Can I interrupt for
Yeah,
a second?
sure.
Because I didn't get this.
This is just these are just pages from the comp plan.
Oh, I know they are,
Yeah.
but you have it there.
That's just my copy of the comp plan.
Oh, okay. So, no, I know how to get the comp plan,
Okay.
but I guess 2 comments.
That's the presentation right there, Ross.
One, yeah, so I guess it would have been helpful. I actually do prepare for these meetings, so, and I like to look at things ahead of time.
Yeah.
But 2, as we go through the whole comp plan process, this is good and it's prep I need. But I hope we get some time where we can have a conversation about the comp plan, about what's in it and what's not in it.
Yeah.
And maybe that will be for future environmental matter and transportation committee and all of those meetings. So again, I guess I'm kind of confused about how you knew about this or got it and I didn't.
This is my copy of the comp plan that I've been
Okay,
making
so,
notes to.
so
I've
this
been
was not
finding-
an attachment that should
No,
have been in
I-
graphics.
I've been finding
Yeah.
his pictures to see what my notes are
Okay.
on the page.
I apologize for not saying this in advance, but it's basically just a selection of page layouts from the comp plan that I think are relevant to understand. And I have slides for all of the goals and recommendations, and we can jump to those if there's.
No,
but
I
yeah.
mean, this is good, but.
We may need more than one meeting,
My preparation
but-
for the meeting was to print out the 2 chapters and go through there.
Let me jump ahead because
No, because this, one of the things I noticed here in reading the verbiage is it kept referring to all the other sections, and I said, instead of printing this out for the meeting, I should have just brought the whole, as you gave me last night.
I see.
The whole spiral bound document, and I could have flipped back and forth, but
Yeah, I see.
I will say for myself, but I think for many of the council members, we want to be part of this process, and we want to be productive and interactive, and it's going to take a lot of meetings to do that.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a big document, even without all the appendices, which I'm slowly printing out
Yeah.
as well.
Well, I know that your September meeting has a few things already in it. If there's a way to do a second meeting in September, or I mean, I think thinking, yeah,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The transportation also, like we got through the preamble, but we didn't get to the policies.
yeah,
So I mean, we talked about maybe having a second meeting for that too.
Well, I think we do. I mean, this is an important document.
Yeah.
And it's a document that is going to survive all of us on the council. And we want it to be good. We want to participate. And I have, as you might suspect, lots of questions and lots of comments. And I'm trying to figure out where's the time going to come from that, particularly given the 90-day period from submission of the document. I mean, that is no way we're coming close to that. Maybe a year and 90 days, but if this is going to be given the respect that it's due, we need to have the time to do it in the dialogue. And you said it last night, I will tell you it's my druthers that there will be a lot of changes to the draft. And some of them may be to cut it back to make it a much more manageable document. But some of them may be to change some of the actual concepts and assumptions in here. And that is our role, is to do that. I'm looking forward to is the Planning Commission meeting tonight for their first of their 6 meetings, or is it next
No,
week?
they've met twice already. Their next meeting is next Thursday.
Yeah, okay. Because I want to listen to what they're saying too. But my feeling is they were kind of partners all along in the development of the plan. I don't anticipate them offering much in the way of changes or recommended amendments to it. But I do think there will be those recommendations from council members and from the Citizens Committee when we form it. But I was at a meeting yesterday with the leadership of the Eastport Civic Association, and they're already forming their own subgroups that are going to be, assigned to take one of the 9 topic areas and develop comments on it. And I'm glad they're doing that. I think that's intended to be productive. But I really am trying to figure out where the time and the time for dialogue is going to come in.
I understand.
Well, and you've been, I think, you've been very responsive to council. We just haven't had, it was 2-3 years ago before COVID. But even then, I've seen you incorporate our comments. But even then, I think you weren't quite finished with all the policy recommendations. So it's good to, if we don't get to it today, we'll schedule another one. Because I've got, it does take a long time to read through it.
It's true.
As I'm sure you're well aware. And so
I started reading it page by page and making notes. And when I got to page 24, and I already had 2 pages of notes, I said, I can't do this. I'm just going to have to go through the whole document. Right. That's why I'm happy. I have my copy I printed out that I'm writing all the stuff, and then I'll have the clean copy to go to. And I haven't even looked at the tool you told us is on the website that compares this to the last one.
Yeah, that's just for the future land use map. But that's.
So anyway, well, I'm trying to convey that some of us are taking this very seriously and want to be partners and contributors, but I'm trying to figure out where we're going to find the time to do it and make everybody happy.
We should take the time that's needed, transportation, I think it's really important to acknowledge that our transportation policy is essentially environmental policy, in the view of this comprehensive plan, but I'm going to go I would like to skip it, to be frank, just so I can get to the environmental sustainability chapter. And we'll
say Ross can watch our committee meeting from yesterday.
Right. The short version is that we put a lot of emphasis on modes of getting around that don't involve a personal vehicle, which has lots of collateral benefits to the city. And you think of minimizing traffic congestion and vehicle emissions and safety and health. Being able to get around safely without a car is a big, and then we have a lot of emphasis on electric mobility, which we've been talking about earlier this meeting, and how public transit can be part of that, regional transit, and the potential ferry service in the future, and the Bay Bridge being how that evolves, the third span that's being planned right now. I think there's a tremendous amount of potential environmental benefit that can come out of that design. So want the city to be an active part of that process. Community facilities, as it relates to environment, it's really the parks policy. Equity in terms of access to parks and open spaces is touched on in this. Water access has probably 6 pages. And I want to acknowledge when we're talking about the tree budget in the CIP, one of the real successes, I think, of the recently approved CIP is there is an incredible uptick in funds for water access. And I just think when you look at that, you can kind of see the potential there's just been the drumbeat for that for a while. And I think that everybody who's involved in the budget should be pleased with how that came, because it's really a remarkable change in my opinion. So that's just one
If I
possible.
can point out,
Yeah.
also between our awards, I guess,
Yeah.
but the Upper Back Creek really needs
Yeah.
a public access
Yeah.
point. And there's a street off Warren Drive, which they have plenty of space, but
Yeah.
might be a bit of a struggle with the community.
We're going to be having recommendations that the public water access plan is happening kind of in parallel to this, and that I think will be done by the end of the fall. So there was a stall because of funding issue, but the funding, it's been resolved, and so we're about to kick it back off soon. But College Creek is a huge opportunity from a environmental perspective and parks perspective. It's never going to be like Spot Creek or Back Creek in terms of development. It's going to be primarily natural, and having a real clear plan for how to enhance that area is part of this. So when we get into the adaptive city section of the comp plan, that's really where the most technical components of our environmental policy are. Environmental sustainability chapter really leads with the most important topic being climate vulnerability. It's the driver of almost everything. Change how the city is adapting to that. And you look at the bottom left of the text, it says there's 4 bullets, and these are really the components of our climate change exposure. It's extreme temperature, extreme precipitation, sea level rise, and coastal storms. Those 4 elements are really the drivers of what we're seeing is contributing to climate change here in Annapolis. And we provide a lot of information about the projections for sea level rise and how that's going to impact the city. I should say, and I'm going through all the narrative here, primarily just to show what informs the goals and recommendations, but because I think it's important to note that every goal and recommendation is really driven by both research and engagement with community members and kind of understanding what is important to them. And so this narrative is kind of indicative of that.
Before you go on, just
Yeah.
a quick note on the last one, an update the text, because the city, I believe, is backed away from the pump project, which you have listed in there.
Oh, okay. Which,
I don't think we're doing that anymore. The pump project.
okay,
Talking about for
I'll
the
find
city
that.
dock?
Yeah, I thought that I don't think we're doing that anymore. It's going to be
Compromise
included
Street
into the
pump?
city dock redevelopment.
Okay, I'll look at that.
Well, check with Burr,
Yeah.
or Jackie might know.
Well, I don't know, we should check, because we had discussed back and forth, but whether or not it would be required still, because our smaller pumps are doing quite well, and then with the way that the other side is being designed, that one pump might
Well,
be
that's-
sufficient, we might not
yeah.
need the one on Compromise Street. But I don't know that a final decision was made.
That's the last I heard from Burr was that they're probably going to back away from that because it's deemed just not needed like it used to be, I guess, as far as these other approaches are working. And
Okay.
overall city dock rebuild is going to be addressing it.
A lot of that will depend upon whether they close the loop on Compromise.
Well, yes.
Because there could be a lot of water.
Exactly.
That's true.
Well, maybe they'll have
Into the
enough
back door.
funds to put the filter in, the one pump they do keep.
We lean on a lot of projections that come from other sources. So these maps are actually out of the flood management plan that Office of Emergency Management recently produced, and the maps are using the state's climate ready action boundary, essentially what are the most at-risk structures based on sea level rise projections and the storm surge from that. So we have a very, I would say, granular understanding of that, and focusing on Eastport is definitely a priority in terms of resilience, because it's just a different type of challenge in the city dock. It's the shoreline conditions are very diverse, and property types, and so
I put a little asterisk in the, about that, in the, how we're gonna implement. I think it's gonna be a very tough call, because, I mean, it's gonna be a cost benefit, and the costs are gonna be high, and the loss would be the property tax revenue, but I'm having a hard time convincing myself that even if you did it over the revenue over 100 years, which we're not gonna protect for 100 years, I'm not sure we save Eastport.
We don't know. We're not going to know
In fact,
until we get
under
it.
the current administration, I don't think we want to save Eastport.
Yeah. Well, we don't know that until we get this resilience plan
Yeah, no, I
done for Eastport.
thinking ahead.
Yeah. But I do want to comment, the maps, they're not, I think it's probably because the printing, the version of the PDF, it's not very clear.
okay.
But also, it's not really explained, like, what the crab inundated zones are. It talks about the 1% annual chance floodplain, which, people probably aren't really going to care too much about 1%. I think what's more telling is akin to the maps we had in the community action plan, the one that shows, here's 1 foot, what's at risk with 1 foot rise, 2 foot rise, 3 foot rise. That's much more intuitive than I think how it's set up now. And that'll really show, because you can say, the anticipated sea level rise, I think it's like 2.5 feet or so for here over the next, by 2100. I'm not entirely sure what their latest is, but having a direct correlation with, here's what is anticipated to be flooded by whatever, 2050, 2100, I think will put a much more real, concrete image in somebody's mind, as opposed to just, 1%, that's not much. Not worried.
Yeah, so can't really zoom in on these. These images came from NOAA. They're like renderings of what that, different sea level rise projections would look like at the city dock. But I hear what you're saying about the crab maps. That they definitely need some more clarification. I think you're right about that. And then, extreme heat is here. We're going to see more extremely hot days in the future, and understanding where that is exaggerated in the city. Our heat island map here on the right is something that we can use to, this is frankly very relevant to where tree canopy is and isn't, and it should be part of our strategy on expanding tree canopy. You could see the Parole and the industrial area of the city, and Parole is really one of the most efficient areas for tree canopy. We show the villages at Providence Point site here. I think it's really, if that project moves forward, I do believe that it will be a success story in terms of our sustainable practice. There's about 125 acre conservation easement associated with that project. That is.
For which one?
The villages at Providence Point. It's, to be able to lock that in, I think is a win for the city. I know that's been a challenging project, but I think it's from a tree canopy and urban heat perspective, I think it's a win for the city. We spend a lot of time, we do talk about tree canopy quite a bit in this comprehensive plan. tree canopy addresses all of the themes in the plan. You know, the equity, health, resilience can all be addressed by improved tree canopy. And I would say, in my role in comprehensive planning, I really do want to be a resource for the council as you think about the budget that's needed. Because I would say I'm not opposed to going back up to 50% as our tree canopy goal, but I think it has to come with a commitment to a budget increase or resources to do that, and be real about, you know, the resources that are needed. The map here.
So that
Yeah.
could be a simple statement saying these goals can't be achieved without
Yeah.
city council providing the finances in the budget
And
to make
regulatory
them happen.
changes.
So
yeah.
they're I'm grasping for the word, the aspirational goals are high, but they're not attainable without a commitment from the city council. That's why I said about, you know, including us as partners in this project, being directive, saying, you know, you're the policymakers, but you're also allegedly the holders of the purse. So you have to make the commitment for this plan to be a success.
Yeah.
I like the direct charge to us, that message.
Yeah, I think that could play well because you know, these goals are goals that the council approved, the council set years ago, and I think if we are having problems meeting it, we need that real frank conversation from staff to say, not to say let's lower the target, but to say, look, these are the goals you agreed to, but you're never going to make it unless you do X, Y, or Z, right?
Yeah.
You know what? I think that words like that in the plan will really go very well with all the environmentalists. I mean, it's like getting a stamp of approval from them. I think of Barbara Beeler saying, you know, you got to put your actions where your mouth is.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
just a thought.
Well,
But I do like this diagram with the tree. I think that's a great one.
Yeah, there's probably 1,000 similar diagrams on the internet, but this one, I mean, I think it definitely says it all. What comes with every new tree is a number of benefits, or a tree that we already have. And the map on the right is important because it shows where the tree loss is happening based on the most recent data we have, which I think is going to be consistent when we get a data update. It's happening primarily in our residential areas. All these red dots all over the city in our residential communities, that's where we're losing tree canopy, and maybe in backyards primarily. But it's ironic because that's where we have the greatest potential stewardship opportunity. So I know Brian Adams, our city arborist, is already working with various HOAs and different communities. That's really going to be a important component of expanding tree canopy, is working with those
The
neighborhoods.
irony for me on that is there are people who do not believe there should be single-family zones, but that is the place where there's the largest capacity to have this extra canopy and also to absorb water runoff.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, we did an analysis. This map on the right shows where we think there's opportunities to add tree canopy based on land use types. So we took out all the existing tree canopy. We actually, now this, just to be clear, I mean, we took out areas of impervious coverage. Now, those are places where we could plant trees, to be sure, but these are the sort of low-hanging fruit locations based on the data that we have. And then you could add to this streets and impervious areas that should certainly get trees as well, but it's just a different challenge in those locations. But
And a couple things on these pages, Eric. I wasn't quite clear what you meant by institutional spaces.
Oh, like schools or churches, or there's a description in the land use chapter of what institution, or else in the glossary, I think there's a definition.
Yeah,
But yeah, those are government facilities generally, and nonprofit facilities.
Why do you think it's important to change that designation? I mean, to have that particular designation, is it because you think that might be easier to do tree plantings there?
Institutional?
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, those are, that's the school properties, any kind of, frankly, any city-owned property is institutional. We don't list our park spaces institutional, but where their buildings are, where city buildings are, county buildings, state buildings.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
yeah.
And minor thing, I think part of the, check with Tom, but the area in green at Crystal Spring, I think is going to be agricultural easement, part of it. And so that might not allow reforestation, but just
Gotcha.
verify. I don't know, Jack, did you recall like how much wasn't part of the property going to be traditional forest conservation easement? I think part of it with like the horse barn was going to be agricultural easement, I think, for Crystal Spring.
Right. I don't know the number off the top of my head.
Well, it doesn't,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter. I just checked with Tom on that. 'Cause,
Yeah.
also, I'm not clear on that map on the left. I can't distinguish what geographic area that shows.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point.
Even
We
when I
probably should
zoom
put
in,
the
I
city
can't-
boundary on that, because it's census tracts are being identified, but you're right. I think if we identify where the city limit is and downtown and just be a little, yeah,
I think it's skewed too, but
it might be. But
anyway.
I think the main thing is that there's just no sense of where the city is really.
Yeah.
So let me. Okay. So air quality is included here. I mean, it is challenging to assess air quality at this level, the city level. It's typically done at a regional level. And so we got these charts are from the state and from our regional planning association. But in fact, my predecessor in my role, Virginia Burke, is now working at MDOT in an air quality capacity. So she was really helpful in helping to what is important to show. And basically at the state level, I mean, we are seeing reductions in a lot of the standard metrics, but at the local level, the primary source of air pollution is from vehicle emissions, and I mean, with the secondary source being building emissions. But so anything we can do to improve vehicle emissions, lower vehicle emissions in the city, and that's why kind of the transportation chapter is key here. You know, the more we transition our fleet to electric vehicles and personal vehicles transition to electric, and more people are getting around without personal vehicles, that's going to have an impact on our local air quality. There's quite a bit that's out of our control, but we're seeing more days of poor air quality, and that's I think there's things we can do at the local level, and it's related to our carbon footprint, which is something we want to lower in the future. This graphic on the left is trying to show that our land use decisions have a lot to do with whether we are a zero carbon city or not, or even a lower carbon city. It's not just about going electric, it's about building the city in a way that's more compact and connected, and kind of goes to the question of consolidating development when we can. It has ramifications on our carbon output. So I think that, you know, the low-hanging fruit is our, you know, the electric mobility is a big component. City buildings being more efficient and sort of setting the standard, which I think we're starting to do. You know, obviously our city garage, it just opened, has a solar array on the roof, and I think there's opportunities to lead in that way.
Eric,
Yeah.
on that last topic, we do have, you mentioned the 2008 energy inventory,
Yeah.
and you also mentioned in the first paragraph, needing a base year, but we do have, that plan set 2006 as the base year for our data as far as the energy inventory. And I don't know where we are with that because it hasn't been updated in a while. And I think
Oh,
staff,
you mean instead of 2008, it's 2006 or?
yeah, you said, no, it was 2008, but you said, unfortunately, it's difficult to set carbon reduction goals without having a current baseline data to inform policy. But we do have that 2006 baseline that was in the community action plan. I'm not sure if you meant something else by that statement.
Well, I meant that knowing what our greenhouse gas output is critical to understand what, how bad are we? What are we trying to limit? We can certainly go by 2006, but I thought it was going to be out of date. And so I'm not saying that to say that we should prolong action, but that we need to really prioritize getting that updated inventory.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and I think staff's working on that.
that's what I thought.
But I think they may have changed the base year. But the problem is when you change the base year, you're essentially lowering your targets because you're trying to reduce, you're trying to get to a new base year that has a higher level of emissions than your original, right? If we're aiming for 2012, we had a lot more emissions than we did in 2006. And so we're essentially weakening our goals if we keep raising the base year. So, there are ways to, so I don't know, we'll see what comes up with the staff report, but I'd still, for the same reasons with the tree canopy, I think we should stick with the original goals and see how far we are with that. Because you also didn't mention those goals in here, and I can't even remember what they are off the top of my head. I don't even think we had goals for the government, but also goals for the community
Yeah.
for carbon reduction.
You mean back when we did the original, the last inventory?
Yeah. The council did adopt those in somewhere around 2008. I'm really curious to see like where we are with our energy because after they factor in the solar farm, because I think we do produce a good portion of at least the government energy from that park.
We really haven't had a report on where the energy from the solar park is going. We talked about it when we were developing it and how it would be used. And I know some of it was going to the grid and some of it was supposed to power the water purification plant and things like that. But I think that would be good to get an update on what the outputs are from the solar park and how they're being used.
Could you add that to your list, Ms. Jackson? Thank you. Yeah, I mean, and Eric, that'd be an interesting thing to put in here too, as far as what's the output of the solar farm,
I agree. That's a great point.
because it's definitely quite an achievement.
Food issues, we touch on it because it has an implication on our health and access to healthy foods as an environmental consequence. It's more regional, I would say, in nature, just talking about agriculture. But the food shed is a reference to where our existing food access exists and where it doesn't. And this map might seem a little overwhelming at first, but it's really about understanding where communities of different income levels have access to food. And the big takeaway is that Eastport is really the main food desert in the city. So anything we can do to improve access in that east, it's this, this orange area which shows distance from a supermarket is the darkest orange, and then the dots represent income level and people in poverty, I should say. So the larger the dot, the more poverty. So you have this confluence of poverty and lack of access to supermarket, and so we are looking at the potential for healthy food options as part of the new the Eastport redevelopment project, the Eastport CNI at the public housing site, and that would go a long way to addressing this.
So at first I was wondering why this was in here. But then I hearkened, and I don't know whether you know, but I strongly support the guaranteed income pilot that Dewan wants to do. And in the Stockton experiment, I was struck by the fact that for the people that were in the program, 25% of their spending of that money went to food.
Wow.
But it was for healthier food that tends to be more expensive. And so I think it does fit in with Healthy City quite comfortably. So
That's really interesting. Yeah. It's a health outcome for sure.
Just so on the couple things. So first of all, the easy one is I think the color of the dots should be changed because out in Parole it kind of blends in with the other color, the green.
Oh, I see.
This, I think, just a different color.
Changing the parole color.
Or
change the dots to blue or something.
But the bigger comment is, I think the approach of this, I like the attention I support the goal, but I'm trying to figure out the best way to relay this. And this isn't necessarily, it's working against some of our other comp plan goals in the sense that it's emphasizing nearness to supermarkets, which we really, on the other hand, don't like. We want to convert them to mixed use. We want to remove their parking lots, remove their pavement, right? So I think we need to reframe this where I think it's completely acceptable to have people next to farmers market. And maybe maybe the farmers markets need to be open more frequently, but there's one in Eastport periodically. I don't know how often that's open, but that should be considered, I think, as long as it's offering.
Two there, because there's the deals, but then there's that other one that comes like once a week and they do fruit. I can't think of the name.
Yeah, so as long as it's offering sufficient food type, I think that should be factored in because we would want to focus on, well, maybe we want to provide a farmer's market to this neighborhood that has a deficit or this one. Because I'm pretty sure you're not saying we need to add more big super box stores to,
Right.
So I think we just need to reframe it to what works for Annapolis. It's not supermarkets. It's, I don't know what you want to call it, Annapolis markets or.
Well, so a couple years ago, Dewan got somebody from Baltimore to bring a whole bunch of people down, and we set up tables by the apartment buildings at 1000 Madison. And God, that was popular. There were tons and tons of people that came. They were very grateful. It was free. But it was really something that I thought we ought to encourage. And then we have what Karma's doing with the Food Fridays, which, again, is very important. I don't even know if you have that concept in here, Eric, but we deliver 220 some odd now cardboard boxes of food to basically anyone who asks for it, but it's primarily in the public housing and the Section 8 housing. And so those are kind of innovative new programs. It comes from the Anne Arundel Food Bank, and having more networks like that could be something that could address these food deserts.
That's a good reference. We should have something about that. I'm familiar with it somewhat, but
There's also, if you look at, I think it's Baltimore, I forget the name of them, but they have these horse-drawn traders.
Arabers, yeah.
And, again, like, if we could, had something like that, we could have them target areas that don't have either market or anything nearby and really target the food deserts. Because that'd be good, because, I'm encountering, another issue that with, I have legislation I'm working on to phase out gas stations, which I think you would, support in the sense of moving away from automobiles, less pavement, opens us up for mixed use, right?
Except you have to drive farther to get to the gas station.
Well, but one of the concerns from my colleagues is that, well, this gas station promised a grocery store when we have a food desert here. But, which obviously that's an important goal for the addressing the food desert, but it works against so many other of our goals and priorities, right? Be it environment or whatever, mixed use, right? And so,
Yeah.
anyway, I think this will give another avenue for that effort to say, look, there are other ways to address food deserts than just box stores.
Yeah, we really should clarify that, because I agree. It's more nuanced than that. It's,
But the horse-drawn carts are such a novelty in this day and age that I think it could attract a lot of customers. On the other hand, horses produce a lot of methane.
Well, and I think that they don't have any amplification, so they go around either with a bell or by voice. I forget. I was reading about it a couple weeks ago. Anyway,
I do have to leave in about 5 minutes. Just so
I was gonna say, like, we're obviously gonna need a part two.
Yeah.
If you'd be willing
But
to
I
come
think
back.
you can see the thirst we have for this kind of dialogue.
yeah.
And, I think we need to do a lot more of it, and I hope we can do it with some larger congregations of the council, because this is the two of us. Sheila would have been here, but I think we've had some productive dialogue without even yet getting to all of the outcome measures.
Yeah.
And
which is probably where most of my comments are.
Yeah.
mine too.
I was sort of, as we were going through, I'm kind of regretting not just going right to those. I guess I just feel
I
like
think this is good as it sets the stage, and I know you want to. I'm sure you want to get this keep it moving, but I think it's worthwhile. This sets the stage and gives colleagues time to read through it more. But then they come back and really have a good discussion about some of the performance measures. Because they are, I mean, again, I think it's important because this helps bring us up to speed with your thinking, the context you're providing to the other chapters, so we know exactly what to look for next time.
glad to hear it.
Appreciate you staying longer and later.
Sure.
And we'll get something scheduled we'll have to, sometime in September.
Yeah.
If we have to do a special meeting, I'm sure we'll be fine with that.
That'd be great.
I know you know how thankless your job can be. The more we dig into this, you're going to feel even less thankful. But we recognize the effort you have put and are putting into this. And last night when I was watching everything get set up, I thought, oh my God, that poor man.
I do have some help.
Just quite an effort.
Yeah.
So
right.
anyway, thank you.
Yeah.
No, appreciate it. Okay.
All right. Anything else on this topic?
Well, I think
for
there's
now?
a lot more, but we'll do
Yes.
it for next time.
Anything else for the good of the order? I think that's all we had, right? Okay.
I move we adjourn.
I'll second. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Meeting adjourned.